Hello, Mage fans. This is Mage the Podcast. My name is Adam Simpson, and I'm joined by Terry Robinson. Today we are going to further the series on Tomes of Magic, and today we will be looking at a book that is near and dear to my heart. And before we get into that, I got a question for Terry here. Terry, I asked you last week to achieve inner peace. Did you take care of that?
I think I'm about 30% of the way there. I downloaded some apps. I found some articles. There was a listicle on BuzzFeed, 5 ways to improve your inner peace, punctuated by GIFs. I read through that a couple of times. There were some @TheBuddha Twitter accounts that I started following, and I'm going to say I'm at least a third of the way towards inner peace.
Hey, not bad. All right. Well, as you probably guessed, today we're talking about the Tradition Book Akashic Brotherhood, and this is going to be the first one. But, before we get into that, Terry, I think you had one or two things to share with us in the way of announcements.
Thank you to all the listeners who went to Storyteller Vault to buy my supplement. It was briefly number 2. If you haven't gotten it yet, by all means, please do. If you meet me somewhere and you see that I have my Mage the Podcast t-shirt on, which may or may not exist as at the time of this recording, but I'm working on it, I will gladly sign your ebook. I don't know what that means, but I'll probably have a Sharpie on me, and I can write it on your Kindle or something. I'll probably result in property destruction, but nonetheless, for you, that is something I will do, dear listener.
I'd like to be there when we have some of those signings.
Yeah.
Okay, well, today we are looking at the Akashic Brotherhood Tradition book. This was put out in 1994. This was written by Emery Barnes, who did not have any contributions or assistance from other people, and of course it was edited by Satiros Bricado. We are still in the first edition days, not too long after Mage got its start, partway through 1993. Now, the Akashic Brotherhood is one of my 3 favorite traditions. I've talked to so many Mage fans who have a favorite tradition or a favorite convention, and when people ask me, it's like, well, the best I can do is to narrow it down to 3. I really like the Akashic Brotherhood, the Hermetic Order, and the Celestial Chorus. I think those are 3 great ones. But this is also reminding me a lot of my college days when I did a full year of study over in Japan. And at one point we took a class trip where we toured around some famous historical, cultural sites of Japan. And one of the spots we went to was Miyajima. That is a small island closer to southern Japan. It's very close to the large city of Kobe. And that island has a special religious significance. It has on it a very old Shinto shrine and an old Buddhist temple. And because of its location, you can walk up the mountain and get to the Buddhist temple. And I remember going into one of the buildings there where they had the shoji screen opened up, so where you can sit on the tatami mat right on the edge, and the mountain tilts right down below you. So you have this amazing view of the bay and the mainland in the distance, and a large section of Miyajima right below you. And I remember just smelling the aroma of the incense from the temple and seeing that amazing view and seeing the sun setting in the distance. And I remember thinking to myself, if this isn't an Akashic chantry, it should be.
Please tell me you were actively thinking that at that point, and you were the world's coolest person.
No, I really was. I was a Mage fan in my college days, and I was sitting there thinking that it's like I saw some monks walking around below there, and it's like, man, I'll bet if I misbehave, they're going to come up here and seriously thrash me. I'm just expecting it.
What is your level of fluency in any East Asian languages?
Well, let's see. I spent 3 months in China. They tried to teach me Chinese. I was a poor student. I'm just going to chalk that up to tonal languages, not my specialty. But I think this really it's me. But in Japan, I've been there multiple times. I was pretty good with Japanese in my college days. Now I'm at the point I've noticed in recent trips where I get to Japan and I know a few pat phrases. And after 3 days, there's a click in my brain. It's like, oh, I can talk Japanese again. Oh, great. That is so convenient. And I can talk to people. And then I get home, and 3 days after I get home, it's like, click. How do I say, what's that word? Darn it. So it's one of those funny things. No, I spent some time in Thailand, and that, again, is a tonal language. I was just helpless. I could not pick it up. So I wanted to start off this episode a little differently than some of the past episodes. I wanted to take this chance to just hit on a few notes of East Asian philosophy and tradition and how they connect rather well to the Akashic Brotherhood. And I'm certainly no expert, so you shouldn't be looking to me for the answers. First off, I've talked with a number of mage fans who find it odd that a group that is so concerned with the mind, philosophy, and transcendentalism spend their time focusing on fitness, fighting, and weapons training. I always thought Do was the very awkwardly named martial art because in Japanese, Do means like path or road or way, just like Tao does in Chinese. You know, the way is Taoism. I'm not certain about Chinese, but in Japanese it's just an everyday word for, you know, a path you can walk on the side of a mountain or a road you can drive your car on. So I would not be at all surprised if I sat down to play mage with some Japanese people and they said, the Akashic Brotherhood, why are they into road construction?
Yeah. I assumed it was Do a la the Korean Do from Taekwondo, just meaning way. And that is the extent of my knowledge of Korean, and we're done.
Yeah, so I guess I shouldn't get too hung up on that one, but I just have flashbacks of seeing road signs in Japan, but anyways. So one of the things that really stands out to me is one of the legends of the Shaolin monastery from China. Now, of course, there are a lot of legends surrounding that, but one of the very well-known legends, which is probably true, speaks of a time many years in the past when a official delegate of Buddhism from some temple in what is today India traveled a long way to visit the Shaolin monastery. And according to the legend, he was supposed to be a very important person, and everyone at the Shaolin monastery was very eager to impress him, and so they gave him a full tour of the whole monastery and tried to put on their best face. And at the end of the tour, according to the legend, the Chinese monks said to their delegate, "So what do you think? How are we doing? Are you impressed?" And the monk said, "This is absolutely terrible. This place is a disaster. You guys have got it all wrong. Your monks are falling asleep during meditation. You're sloppy. You're a mess. This will not stand." He said, "I'm going to whip you guys into shape." He said, "Starting tomorrow, we are going to do combat training." Now, of course, that might sound a little odd to a lot of us today. Well, what are Buddhist monks, even from India, so interested in combat training? Well, it really... when you go back hundreds of years, they didn't have as much of a concept of like exercise or physical fitness. You know, in the ancient world, both Western or Eastern, if you wanted to get someone into shape, you train a man to fight, and yeah, he's going to be in shape. So according to the legend of Shaolin, that's how they got started in their Chinese martial arts. And according to the legend, after they were training their monks to fight, they were more successful in their meditations, they were more diligent in all of their practices, and so they continued doing it, and of course, over time it slowly morphed into a Chinese kind of combat training, not an Indian kind of combat training. And the basic thinking goes, if you whip your body into shape, the mind will follow. And that is the basic thinking for the Akashic Brotherhood. They get new initiates and they say, look, we're going to train you in these physical pursuits. And when your body is in shape, the mind will follow. And then that is when we can start teaching you the sphere of mind.
The thing I do like about it is one of the recurring themes in the world of darkness is that there's no fat people. This is actually one of the few cases where they give like an in-world explanation of that. Like, oh, you want access to the mind sphere? Well, you're going to need to be ripped and be able to like run up the side of a mountain. And if you can't, you don't get the ability to shield your thoughts. So how about them apples?
Another thing I hear a lot about is, of course, in the West, we have this undercurrent in Western culture where we look out for the fortune cookie summaries and the funky mumbo jumbo East Asian philosophy that doesn't make a lot of sense. And sometimes that's due to bad translation. Sometimes that's due to Westerners imitating Eastern thought and a few other sources. But I remember years back when I was reading the quotations under the tradition descriptions in the first edition core book and the second edition core book for the Akashic Brotherhood, I thought, well, this sounds like fortune cookie material. First edition book says, first you must learn the craft of magic, then forget the craft and embody the art of living through Do. Second edition core book gives us this, first you must learn Do, then you must forget Do. Must you remember to breathe for breathing to occur? No, it is just the same with Do. And so I read these when I was a teenager, and I thought, this sounds a little corny. What are they talking about here? And as I come back to this a few years later, I think, well, actually, I think there's more here than I first suspected. I think the writers at Mage were a little more on the ball than I gave them credit for when I was younger. I want to share with you a shorter quotation from Taoist thought. This is from Chuang Tzu, The Inner Chapters, which is a book I'll mention more at the end of the episode. But this is a conversation between a disciple and a master. It goes like this. I am learning, said Yen Hui. How? Asked the master. I have forgotten the rules of righteousness and the levels of virtuousness, he answered. Good, but you can do better, said the master. Some days later, Yen Hui said, I am making progress. How? Asked the master. I have forgotten the rituals and music, was the answer. Better, but not perfect, said the master. Some time later, Yen Hui said to the master, Now I will sit down and forget everything. The master looked up, surprised. What do you mean, forget everything? He quickly asked. I forget my body and my senses, and I leave all illusion and knowledge behind me, Yen Hui answered. In the middle of nothing, I enter the source of all. The master bowed. You have transcended the limits of time and knowledge. You have left me far behind you. You have found the path. And again, when I come to this and read this quotation, I think, is this guy bragging about having Alzheimer's disease? I thought you got a puffed up chest when you learned something, not when you forgot something. I mean, my wife gets really upset with me when I forget basically everything. But according to Taoist thought, there's more going on here. There is this idea that there is a purity and a simplicity in nature that is naturally there. But human civilization and practices over countless years have built up falsehoods, misconceptions, conveniences that distract people from really seeing these underlying truths that are supposed to be obvious all around them. And so, not so different from some of the French thinking, like I think it was Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who talked about the purity of nature and how society pollutes us and pulls us away from that. Taoism isn't quite the same thing, but it does have some overlap. In Taoism, they teach that you should seclude yourself from civilization, from towns and cities and groups of people. Get far away and by yourself and practice hard at the foundational truths of Taoism. And that way you can free yourself from so many years of convention and get back to the basic truths. And they go further than that. They say that after you work and spend all this time studying and learning these things, then you're supposed to right away put it into practice. Make it a part of your life, a part of your daily practice. And as you do that, it will become natural. It'll become a part of your day, a part of who you are. And so as it becomes a part of your daily practice, you can, as they say, forget all of this stuff you spent so much time studying.
Would I be radically simplifying this if I said, hey, take this thing, make it a habit?
No, that's a simplification, of course, but that is the basic point. When you make it a habit, you don't have to remember it anymore. And this maps well to the metaphysic of magic that we find in Mage the Ascension. Disciples of all the different traditions and really conventions, they separate themselves from regular society, they take in all this knowledge, they practice hard, they learn it well, and then they are doing it. Also, another big influence that we see on the Akashic Brotherhood is Zen, and so I just wanted to take a moment to mention what I've found to be among gamers a misunderstanding over koans. Now, koans that's a Japanese word for these short riddles or short teaching expressions, and in Zen Buddhism, koans take more importance than they do in other branches of Buddhism, and the true koan is a riddle that has no answer. It is a problem that actually cannot be solved. So I talked to a number of gamers who think, oh yeah, as you get wiser and wiser in the Akashic ways, you can solve more and more of those koans. It's like, well, technically, I mean, if you want to be really detailed about it.
The term solve, like it's a big philosophical Rubik's Cube, where it's like, okay, yeah, we're halfway through this koan. We got all the white cubes on one side. We're really making our way towards enlightenment.
Yeah, and really a koan is supposed to be something that no one can solve. The most famous koan, of course, is what is the sound of one hand clapping, and of course, we've got a lot of jokes on that, like the Simpsons episode where Bart Simpson holds his hands up and he slaps the fingertips against the palm of one hand, and there's a little bit of a sound. He says, "Ah, that's the sound." It's like, okay. I thought that was funny too, but really what the original koan meant was clapping is something you do when you put two hands together. So if you clap with one hand, what is the sound? Well, you can't clap with one hand, according to the traditional thinking of the people who wrote this koan. So there is no answer to that. So the point of a koan is you focus your mind really hard on solving a problem that can't be solved.
Or it chews up certain cognitive cycles. I have a mindfulness meditation practice. Part of what is very important in that to me is having some sort of repeated mental stimulus, like repeatedly counting the breath or meditating on an image or something like that. And fixing your focus on something like that frees up, let's say, 85% of your mind and kind of lets that other remaining quiet 15% express itself. So I could also see a koan as a meditative focus in that regard, to occupy the noisy, loud, wordy, thinky part of the brain and kind of let what remains run around and express itself a little bit.
Yeah, that sounds very good. See, you know more about the Akashic Brotherhood than you thought.
Oh, no, mine is almost out of the Western meditative traditions. I find the Gnostics endlessly fascinating. So the actual Batin sect inside of Islam that would meditate on things like the impossibility of exclusion, one of their notions was the idea that whenever you make a positive claim about God, you are implicitly saying that the opposite of that is not true. Like if I were to say that Adam is tall, I am implicitly saying that Adam is not short. But the problem with talking about an entity one believes to be infinite is you cannot limit infinity by saying something that it is not. So a Batin meditative focus might be something like, God is not foolish and God is not foolish. And they found devotion in the cognitive tension required to hold those two contradictory thoughts in mind at the same time. And in that space, they believed that the self that could understand the divine was more able to express itself. And I very much like the idea of, here's a thing to do to chew up the noisy part of you, and then the rest of the mind can kind of do its work.
There was extra material written by the author for this book that was edited by the people at White Wolf and approved, but it was cut out of the book only because of length. This book clocks in at the normal 68 pages for a tradition book. And so there was extra material that was left on the cutting room floor. And so what Emery Barnes did back in 1994 was he dropped it into an email, and he emailed it to Anders Sandberg, who was running Anders' Mage Page at that point. So it went up on Anders' Mage Page under the title Secret Sects of the Akashic Brotherhood by Emery Barnes. And you can find that in the Akashic Brotherhood page under Traditions on Anders' Mage Page 2.0. So it's extra rotes, and it is extra material for the 4 sects. And with that, I'm ready to hear about the sections of the book. Terry,
Woo!
What can you tell us?
I had a fraught relationship with this book. It was a case of reading through it and me going, this seems a little bit off. I don't actually know what East Asian cultural practices necessarily are, but this doesn't necessarily seem like it's those. So there was kind of this tension the entire time, and I would periodically jot things down to double check on the internet and be like, do people actually do this? Because I did not want to conflate the practices listed in the book as reflecting necessarily a real world tradition. It begins with an apprentice being abducted, a hitmark's head is kicked off, a guy taps on a wall 2 to 3 times, and suddenly a Correspondence 4 portal opens up, because that's totally going to happen without paradox. They suddenly find themselves in a chantry where there are seemingly infinite practitioners, and then the book carries on from there. We get a brief section on what the theme, mood, and ideas of the book are. And the first thing that confused the dickens out of me is on page 10, where it says drama. What comes and goes around, you reap what you sow. Ideas and occurrences tend to spiral back upon themselves. Now, in some cases, it's listed as drama, and in some cases, it's listed as dharma. So I'm not sure which one was supposed to be used, but to me, that doesn't sound like dharma. But again, I'm a white guy who does math for a living, so maybe don't trust me when it comes to assessing the practices of other cultures. We have a thankfully thorough terminology section explaining all the special argot that's used by the Akashic Brotherhood. My favorite is they give you a definition of calculating, which is to make an educated assumption based on known facts through extrapolation of information.
Oh, good. I was always wondering.
Exactly. I had encountered the word calculating my entire life, and I never knew. And then it has some other words that are never mentioned again, like sword saint, which is a person who's pretty good at swords. So glad we got that. Then we get a section on the culture of the Akashic Brotherhood, where they do some pretty good painting of the scenery of what it's like to be at this chantry. I'm not entirely sure how to pronounce the Akashic term they use for chantry. I'm assuming it's something like Shu Dao Yuan. That goes in the, if you correct me, I will fully anticipate that one, and I will nod and say, yes, what you said. I may even make a brief recording of it. That way, if I ever need to say it again in the future, I can just hit the play button on that. We get a brief section then on what Do is, and the entire text is littered with these nice little asides that make mention to, I guess you could say, the poetry or the storycraft of certain regions of East Asia. I am not familiar enough with the topic to be like, oh, this story they talk about mages off to the side is actually a takeoff of this well-known tale that is commonly told in this area of the world. So I just nodded politely and continued on there. We get more information about the apprentice, battering ram, and their past lives. We find out about Gentle Mountain and Fall Breeze, and we are finally exposed to the Akashic record, where you have this idea that most of what the Brotherhood knows is not in books, but in people's heads. This one I found absolutely mystifying because they make reference to the fact that the Akashic record is held within the realm of dreams, and I'm like, oh man, secret changeling crossover that nobody noticed except for me until now. And then I tore through every changeling book I could find, as well as the revised Akashic Brotherhood book, and absolutely no mention of it is made again. So I'm like, darn, I guess the Akashic record is not secretly held inside of the dreaming.
You're too far ahead of the curve. You got to wait for the Mage 20 supplement.
Exactly. Maybe M5 is finally going to reveal the secret Akashiana changeling crossover that we didn't know that we wanted. It then goes on to the history of the Akashic Brotherhood, which made remarkably little sense to me. They bang on about the Himalayan Wars a lot more than I initially remember. And they also outline the alternative view of the Weaver, Worm, and Wild in the form of the tiger, the phoenix, and the dragon, which I literally had to write down which one represented what in the metaphysical trinity and constantly consult that throughout the story, because there'll be a line where like dragon yelled at the tiger and I'm like, okay, that's a metaphor for, okay, I'm following again. But hey, if you don't have to do a little bit of lifting, then it doesn't actually count as reading. Talk about the Euthanatos problem, which was just kind of a menacing chapter title unto itself. And again, it goes through a pretty standard history section. That is until we get to chapter 3, The Blossom and the Thorn, the Council of Nine, and our own search for balance, where we get 9 pages of dense prose, where we find out that prejudice is bad. Now, every book had a section talking about the Council of the Nine Mystic Traditions and the founding and their traditions' interaction with other traditions. But here we get 9 rock'em sock'em pages. The best part is there will be cases where a character will talk about their stereotypes of another character, but there isn't actually enough information to know what tradition they're talking about in the other person, where they're like, see that guy wearing robes? We don't like those robed people. I'm like, okay, which robed people wore this? This is the 15th century. Robes are kind of a big deal. Buttons aren't that common yet. You got to give us, you got to give them some more detail here, Smalls. Then we go on to character templates, which I thought were actually somewhat interesting. And then finally, we get information on magic and focuses and rotes and such, which we're going to go into more detail later. But that was pretty well my experience of it. I read it from left to right. The one additional bit of homework I did for this, the book is littered with what I presume is either simplified or traditional Chinese ideograms. And from what I understand, they are excerpts from pieces of poetry. But I asked a colleague of mine who has a background in Chinese literature and is from mainland China what they meant. And she just kind of stared at it and goes, it looks like somebody didn't quite copy this correctly. And I said, what do you mean? She said, well, the literal translation of this one is the gentleman is flirtatious between water and stone. She's like, I've read a lot of ancient Chinese poetry, and it seems like there's something missing or something added. And she's like, and we thumb through some more. And she's like, this one says literally, the sun triggers the barn to become transparent. That doesn't make a lot of sense. And then the final one, she's like, this one makes sense. The general population finds the Buddha in their hearts. I'm like, okay, that I can get behind. Hands down. My favorite section, though, is the discussion of familiars, where they indicate that the dragon scale practitioners tend to keep bears as familiars. And I don't know about you, but if you want me interested in your tradition, tell me that someone keeps a bear as a familiar. I am there all day long. That was your reward for making it through 9 pages of how we've learned that prejudice is a bad thing.
I have a little bit more familiarity with East Asian culture, but Terry, I gotta say, my reaction was basically the same as yours. In a lot of these sections, I was reading it through going, I'm not sure if this is quite on here. I mean, maybe I don't understand Asian culture enough, but now I'm starting to wonder if the author does either. So you're not alone in some of your feelings reading through this book. I got the general impression that the author had a lot of enthusiasm to bring to the project and had a neat idea, but the execution was not as good as it could have been. And as for the Chinese characters used on the page margins, I have 2 very fat and heavy Chinese character dictionaries, but they're both for people translating between English and Japanese, because Japan has used the traditional Chinese characters for a long time. And it is possible that when you use the Japanese translations, you might get something different. I mean, one easy example is if you put the characters for hand and paper next to each other, hand paper. In Japan, that means a letter, like I'm going to write a letter and mail it to you. In China, that means toilet paper.
Interesting.
So,
I would have assumed it meant paper airplane.
So for that reason, if I were to take my Japanese character dictionaries and translate it through, I'm guessing I would get a garbled mess much like you got. But it is possible that the author was looking at it from the Japanese use of the characters rather than the Chinese. So,
well, I think you and I were talking before about even if you do a perfect translation, there is also the cultural knowledge on top of that. My favorite one was I was in Germany and I was reading over the menu, and in my very rudimentary German, I saw that one of the things was, oh, I recognize these words. Let me see if I can translate it. And I saw that the dish was literally translated to hand cheese with music. And I'm looking over it and I asked my hosts, what is hand cheese with music? Did I translate that correctly? And they say in English, oh no, it's hand cheese with music. Haven't you ever had it before? And I felt like I was having a very small stroke, because those are words next to each other that I do not consider to be a food. And it's just one of those cases where hand cheese with music refers to a particular dish. No one seemingly is quite sure where it comes from. It was lovely. The with music refers to it being served with onions, in the same way that we might say a dish is Florentine if it's served with spinach or something like that. It's just a case where you either have that cultural knowledge or you don't.
I had a very similar reaction to the chapter on the external relations. 9 pages, and at that point I felt like the author was really getting into his fiction and the characters that he has in his fiction, but he kind of forgot about his subject, because I was reading through that chapter, it's like, okay, you're really into your characters and your fiction, and I guess that's great and everything, but as a chapter for teaching me about external relations with other traditions in the Council of Nine and what the Akashics think of them, I'm not picking up much here. It's like the characters met this verbena and they had a short conversation and then it was over, and I'm like, yeah, okay, that doesn't tell me anything about what Akashics in general think of the verbena, but
it was a short conversation 500 years ago. So it's not even like contemporary in a lot of the cases.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, okay, these are interesting scenes in the life of these characters of yours, but for the purpose of telling me about external relations with other traditions, you dropped the ball. So in the history of the Akashic Brotherhood, I felt that there was quite an omission. In a lot of East Asian countries, there is a tradition or a period of history where they had their warrior monks. This was quite pronounced in Japan and Mongolia, but it was something that occurred in other East Asian countries as well. And I was kind of thinking, okay, the Akashic Brotherhood has had an influence on sleeper society in East Asian countries for hundreds of years. I would really like to see this link between the warrior monk tradition, which ran out of hand and caused havoc in a number of East Asian countries in history. Were the Akashic Brotherhood, were they causing that and then later they regretted it? Or was this a case of the sleepers taking some principles from the Akashic Brotherhood and running off in the wrong direction and causing their own problems?
Oh no, that's entirely reasonable. In the same way that a byproduct of focusing on how you think things were 550 years ago is we don't really get an idea of what they think of the Sons of Ether or the Virtual Adepts.
Yeah.
And a group that focuses on the mind as opposed to another group who believes that consciousness can be uploaded into the internet, I feel like there's going to be some real interesting conversations there that we didn't get.
Yeah, and it would have been really fun to see that, but instead the author got carried away with presenting to the reader this cool idea of the Akashic Record, which I'll go on record as saying I think the Akashic Record in Mage the Ascension is a totally cool idea. But still, it doesn't change the fact that the author got carried away and went back hundreds of years, and in doing so did not give us some good information on more modern members of the Council of Nine Mystic Traditions and a few other things that are going on in the world that would have been really cool to hear about. Now, one of the things about the Akashic Brotherhood that has caused some waves, I guess, in more recent years is some people have become a little upset over the fact that it's called the Akashic Brotherhood, which seems more masculine and not to be an inclusive term. And that was actually met head on in the book. They said that brotherhood is meant to be a gender neutral term, and all members of the Akashic Brotherhood, whether male, female, or perhaps something different, they're all called brothers. And I guess it's nice that the author addressed this issue, but for my part, I found it a bit awkward. If I was going to go back 500 years to a more, some might say, conservative culture like, say, China 500 years ago, and I'll bet you that women just didn't like being called men. I'll bet you dimes to donuts that they just weren't crazy about that. So in my own chronicles, I've just said that there's an Akashic Brotherhood and there's an Akashic Sisterhood, and the male members are called brothers and the female members are called sisters. It's not so different from traditional Buddhist monasteries in East Asian countries, where they would get all of the males together and they would have the monastery for them, and they would, and in English we translate that as the Buddhist monks, and they would get all the female members together and have their own monastery, and we translate in English as the Buddhist nuns, which perhaps is not the best translation, but if you go back and read books written in the 1800s and early 1900s, that's how they translated those terms.
I was waiting for you to say monk and monkette, so I was kind of surprised when you ultimately said nuns. Did you like the part as much as I did where they're like, hey, we had a giant fight with the Euthanatos because they believe that they could predict who should be shoved through the wheel again, and we don't. When the opening fiction says, hey, that guy abuses his wife, I'm going to drop a geas on him to commit suicide when he gets home.
Yeah, I can only speculate clumsily at why this was. Yeah, I think there was an overemphasis on the old Himalayan wars.
It's just the fact that you had this is the fundamental difference between us. The Himalayan war happened, and then the guy in the opening fiction literally does the thing that he says the Euthanatos are so bad for doing. I'm like, that's a little bit cute.
It was awkward, and I also felt that something was missed or perhaps handled incorrectly when you have this tradition that, going back into prehistory, has always emphasized meditation and mindfulness and peace and everything. They get so whipped up during the Himalaya Wars that they are recruiting new members specifically to make them soldiers and send them off to fight. And of course, you can draw correlations with the southern martial art styles of China, where there was times in the past where they were specifically for weaponizing peasants. And okay, there's that. But I just have a hard time believing that the Akashic Brotherhood, who has this long-standing tradition, is going to get whipped up and say, to war, we're going to go to war. Yeah, we're going to kill all those guys. And then when it's done, it's like, oh yeah, well, peaceful. Yeah, let's get peaceful again. It just seemed awkward.
Hey, the Vikings have produced the happiest countries on the face of the planet. So all it takes is a few centuries to go from warlike to having everything seemingly pretty figured out. So that
I guess, but the Akashic Brotherhood went from peaceful to warlike to peaceful again. It's like, okay, now the Vikings didn't do that. Not as far as I know.
But for instance, the Catholic Church has gone through alternate periods of inward looking versus being more worldly, let's say. So that one I'll give them. I feel like that is the fundamental nature of humanity of, oh, we need to win and we need to win big, being this multi-century sideline of this is not how ascension is achieved.
One thing I noticed when looking back at the early first edition books and comparing them to, say, the second edition or later books is it looks like when Mage was first written, it really looks like the Akashic Brotherhood were supposed to be the combat mages. When you look through the first edition core book, where all of the foci are specifically called out for each tradition, the Akashic brothers have focus for certain spheres where you tie a sash around your waist and then you just wear it and the focus is in place. Or the focus is Do, basically martial arts fighting. Or you have a weapon in your hand and that's your focus for like these different spheres. So the Akashic Brotherhood have an advantage in earlier first edition over other mages, where their magical rotes and effects are much easier and much faster to do in a combat situation. And they were supposed to be like, I don't know, the protection or the bodyguard for the Cabal. Like, oh, the technocrats have showed up and they're shooting and now we're really in trouble. We got to get out of here. Well, the Akashic can run some interference and protect us while we, hightail it out of here, and then he'll follow afterwards. I think that was the general idea. There was, I think, this influence to bring in a lot of the pulp fiction tropes of action and adventure. For example, the Euthanatos were the super cool assassins who could take out anybody, and the Sons of Ether had these crazy scientific inventions that could turn over any scene with a giant explosion or a giant spark or a ray blast or something. And the Akashic Brothers come in with the super cool martial arts, the tough fighters who can protect the rest of the Cabal. And of course, as we get into later first edition and second edition, the foci for all the traditions were basically loosened up so that you can choose which ones you like, which is an innovation I'm really behind. I really back that. Ricardo did us all a favor with that one.
The notion, though, of them being combat, and vampires can dish out pain like they're champs, and werewolves are 9-foot-tall murder machines in Krynos form.
Oh, yeah.
And then to be like, oh no, the Akashic, who is largely incapable of dealing aggravated damage and also has to do everything within arm's reach, is totally going to lay down the law on this.
Well, I was thinking by mage terms. I mean, the other eight traditions. The other 8 traditions are going to look at the Akashics and go, wow, these guys can really fight. And then they meet a werewolf, and it's like, okay, Mr. Akashic, just get out of here.
Or a mortal with a gun. Like, we need to keep remembering the power of a high-powered rifle at great distance to deal 15 dice worth of damage and not know where it's coming from. And it's one of those things where it was first edition. No one had any idea where the game was going to go. So there's going to be a refactoring or a refocusing as time goes on to be like, hey, anyone can have access to a certain degree of martial power. In Revised, we get the notion of the Holy Warrior in the Celestial Chorus and so on. And like every tradition has some manifestation that is heavily martial, and every tradition has some manifestation that is heavily inward and meditative, which I certainly appreciated. The one recurring theme from first edition that I found interesting was, I didn't realize it until I started rereading all the tradition books, but the focus that every tradition seemingly believes that the pure ones did exist. There seems to be agreement that in the great old time, the pure ones exist, the pure ones shattered, our avatars are shards of the pure ones. Whether that is literal or whether that is metaphorical is up for debate, but everyone kind of agrees on that. It kind of surprised me to see that in the Akashic Brotherhood book. In my head, that was a cosmology that was relatively uncommon in the Council of the Nine, and this is just a case of me misremembering, so take that. I also like the part where he scans avatars, like he has an app on his phone, where
Hold still, let me get a good scan.
Yeah, exactly. I'm like, this one's blurry. Can you try not to move so much? And they talk about tracking avatars, and that also seemed to be a thing that would eventually be changed. The idea that we don't know necessarily who's going to awaken at any given time. We don't know how to tilt the tables towards somebody reincarnating in a particular form. Here it was much more predetermined, or at least determinable, in a way that mystery seems to be added to the process later on in second edition and Revised.
But I really liked the Akashic record in this book. I think the fiction kind of overdid it a bit. But the idea behind the Akashic record, I think that's an innovation that is unique to this tradition. Now, you could say it's in the dream realms. You could say it's in the heads of living mages. You could say that there's some part of the High Umbra that perhaps they haven't even identified clearly where they're storing their records. But it's interesting. It brings the Umbra into things, which I always like. I like having this idea of a hermetic mage will go to an Akashic Chantry and show me your library. And they go in, they see this pretty small library, and it's like, this is nothing much, and they leave. And it's like, you didn't get it. The Akashic record is only like 10, 20, 30% here, and the rest of it is on a higher plane, and you just didn't get it. And I think it's cool to have exchanges like that.
Yeah, the one addition I'd make to that is they go to the tiny library, which is just this room with scrolls or papyri or so on, and the archivist, not realizing that the archivist is the main repository of those records.
This book had heavy references to reincarnation. I mean, really turned up the knob to 11 on this. And it wasn't long before it started sounding artificial to me. I mean, I'm no expert, of course, but I have read a number of newer and older translated works from the East Asian countries and tried to dip into reading stuff from the original Japanese. And yeah, there's traditions where they talk about reincarnation, but this just took it to a higher level that sounded a little strange to me. It seemed like they fixate on past lives so much. I mean, there's actual examples in the fiction where a character is taken to an Akashic chantry, and they said, "Oh, you've been with us for all these past lives, so we're welcoming you into the next one." It's like, well, what about the guy who, in his past lives, was not a member of the Akashic Brotherhood? Are they going to exclude him? Or I don't know, it just sounds weird. It seems like the Akashic Brotherhood, instead of delving into their past lives, it sounds like a 14-year-old with who's dabbling in the occult more than someone with all this knowledge of Eastern tradition.
And the problem I have with that is I feel like it goes against a lot of the themes of Mage. Like, it is possible to thread the needle to say, how do we maintain the paradox of being both dynamic entities but also recognizing that our power comes from centuries of tradition? To say, hey, welcome back, pick up where you left off. It turns them into vampires, practically, these ageless entities that are pursuing love and debt and rage across lives, and they've been reincarnating for thousands of years. Also, it doesn't do a good job of separating the psyche from the soul from the avatar, which we never really get a good answer to. And they don't always, they being, in this case, the author, doesn't always succeed in saying, hey, vampires are eternal entities and that breeds stasis. We are, in a manner of speaking, eternal entities, but with continuous renewal. Part of what we have to do is abandon the attachments we had in previous lives while still learning from them, which is brought up in one or two cases. But I feel like that tension could have been brought out more, and I feel like when you do everything in character, you lose the ability to point at it and say, hey guys, this is what's going on here, which as a bad storyteller, I appreciate.
It seems like if you were to begin training with the Akashic Brotherhood, they wouldn't immediately say, "Oh, well, this is how you were in a past life, so that's how you'll be again." And isn't it great we're all together again? It's like they should focus more on the basic teachings and say, "Who are you going to be in this lifetime? What will you become this time?" It seems more of a fit for me.
Yeah, this is a weird case where the koan of "show me the face you had before you were born" is no longer a koan, because they're like, hey, this is what you used to look like in a previous incarnation. It's like,
yeah, we got this painting made in the 1500s. Here you go. Yes, you. Okay, we're good.
Speaking of painting, I did very much enjoy the art throughout the book. I have no idea the degree to which it is consistent with actual styles of East Asia. I just found it visually pleasing.
Yeah, the chapter header images done by Joshua Gabriel Timbrook, I really liked those. I really liked that rough brush stroke, which is an art style that they are still practicing in Japan and China. When I was in China in 1994, there were a lot of people using that style of painting, and they were putting them up in their homes and selling them at street bazaars and stuff like that. And so that was just a natural fit for me. I really liked those chapter header images. Okay, one thing I have with the book was it made it sound like the older Eastern artificers, which later became Iteration X, and the Akashic Brotherhood were the only two mage factions in East Asia in olden times. I mean, it refers to them repeatedly and no one else. And it actually talks about the struggle between them as if there are no other groups. Okay, I understand that at this point in Mage the Ascension, in first edition, the only written up groups of mages from East Asia were the Artificers, sort of the proto-Iteration X, and also the Akashic Brotherhood. But I mean, just naturally, I mean, anybody with some kind of imagination is going to speculate on other groups or other traditions or other things going on. And so I just have a beef with this. It's like, look, you should have made mention of other styles of magic or other groups doing things in old Asia, because it's just too simplistic for me.
We don't have the Wu Lung yet. We don't have the Wu Kang, as we all roll our eyes. But again, this is a case where you're a good storyteller, Adam, and you looked at this and said, well, this is an area with literally millennia of traditions inhabited by hundreds of different cultures and ultimately would show host to billions of souls. There's probably a bunch of groups. And I, being a 14-year-old, was like, everyone from Asia is an Akashic. So, that's...
Yeah. Well, no, it doesn't take someone like me who's spent years reading a number of books and traveling around that region to see that it's like, this looks a little simplistic to me. One thing that I have to mention also is East Asian cultures tend to be a lot more strict and you could say conservative than a lot of Western people are used to encountering. And so I thought it might have been a little helpful to have some example in here of the tension between a younger or perhaps Western student joining the Akashic Brotherhood and then running up against all of these teachers, trainers, masters, lecturers, etc., who expect real strict adherence to etiquette and traditions and order and stuff from hundreds of years ago. And there was really no mention of that in this book. I mean, the Akashic Brotherhood is going to experience at some secluded chantry somewhere. I mean, that's something for storytellers to kind of think about and work into their stories. And I think it was appropriate to make at least a glancing mention of that in this book.
We frequently talk about how there's going to be a gap between actual meat space cultural practices and what is represented as the magical analogs, but I feel like at least to note that, hey, in the same way that some of these prove to be stricter than what most people expect, even if it isn't necessarily the standard or the norm, you should make mention that there are probably groups within this that are highly devoted to, as you said, a conservative presentation of this, that this is a tradition that's been handed down over millennia and we will preserve it fiercely.
And there's always the dodge. Well, in your last life, you didn't mind that rule.
Well, that's like the Book of Madness, the world's worst pickup line. Remember me from your last incarnation?
Yeah. But I wanted to take a few minutes and talk about the sects, the 4 subgroups within the Akashic Brotherhood. Those 4 groups are the Orange Robes, the Scales of the Dragon, the Yogi, and the Blueskins. And let's see, if I remember correctly, those 4 sects were changed for the revised era, which I really don't have a problem with. I think it's cool that they had these sects, and as Terry mentioned, was common practice in the early first edition days. They take each sect and connect it to an essence. For example, questing, dynamic, primordial, pattern, etc. And so the Orange Robes are the largest group, largest sect within the Akashic Brotherhood. They are named after the orange robes that are still worn to this day by the Thai Buddhist monks. It's a common sight in Thailand today. I guess you could call them the orange robes. You see them walking down the street in any town in Thailand.
I know that color to be saffron. Is that the same as orange in this case, or?
Yeah.
Okay.
They call them orange robes here, but reading things I hear in English, I see saffron, and the colors are quite similar. So I guess it's understandable that the author went to orange. But the oranges are the larger group. They're peaceful. They're more interested in passing on the traditions of the Akashic Brotherhood. The Scales of the Dragon are supposed to be the members who are more focused on hard, direct martial arts, those aspects of Do. They're very serious about their weapons training, preparing for combat. They're very serious about stepping in when any chantry or member of the Akashic Brotherhood needs physical defense from an actual threat. They're the ones who want to be the ones doing raids on enemy chantries when the leadership decides that has to happen. And of course, that's an easy tie-in with the very popular martial arts films that this author was very enthusiastic about.
Yeah, the Yogi dynamic are the spirit specialists, and the Blueskins, primordial essence, focus their lives on ascension. The explanation the book gives is that they are called Blueskins because as they near ascension, their skin becomes blue as it is saturated with quintessence. So
I guess that's an explanation, but I don't remember seeing anything about that in any later published book on Mage. So that was like one of those throwaway ideas.
Yep. I am merely reading said throwaway line from the glossary. So I'm proving that I did my homework, okay? I read the assignment.
No one can accuse you of slacking off.
Yeah.
I really liked the point on familiars. In my groups in the past, I didn't have players that really got excited about familiars for their characters, but talking with other Mage fans, they've had a number of players who really got into the idea of their animal buddy. They really like familiars, and so for those players, this was helpful.
A furry tractor and just ride that into combat. That's how you win a fight.
Well, yeah, the Scales of the Dragon for their familiars are supposed to favor large and more dangerous animals like a tiger or a bear or something like that. And you might think
sperm whale.
Yeah, you might think, well, that's kind of crazy, but actually, in these secluded wilderness mountain chantries, you can actually get away with that. The tiger will come up to the chantry sometimes, get a pat, pass on some wisdom, and then run off into the forest again. And this can actually work. But if your chronicle is in New York City, then okay, we got to talk.
I've never had much experience with familiars, except in cases where a character had a PDA or something that was also a familiar or something. That's about as far as I went with that. I like the rotes because I felt like it succeeded in delivering a certain amount of flavor that the rest of the book didn't. We only got kind of sideways reference to like the wuxia school of martial storytelling and of great legend, and of, oh, these are some of the great heroic and epic deeds that were done by those before you. And that was kind of absent from the book until we got to this end section where each rote was kind of a little story where the nut of the story occurs, and then kind of as this bonus you say, oh, by the way, there's this rote. And I thought that was a super interesting way of conveying that, and pound for pound, the appendix was probably my favorite section.
Yeah, of the sections, it was probably my favorite too. For example, there's mention to something that in the Book of Shadows, the Mage Player's Guide, that not a lot of people really focus on. I talked about how different groups have their different hand signals or sign language, and not a lot of people focused on that. But this tradition book said, oh yeah, the Akashic Brotherhood, they really do have their hand gestures and their signs. Here's an example of some, and here's how they teach them and how they use them. And I thought that was really neat. I thought it was appropriate, it fit, and I really liked that. Well, anything else on the appendix before we move to the next section?
I thought the character templates were fine. I like that the superhero has 1 dot in intelligence. We don't have that pop up a lot in Mage, which is enjoyable. I did like the 2 character write-ups they had for Raging Eagle and Gentle Mountain. And it was interesting that Raging Eagle had the note that said, whenever he leaves the Chantry for more than a week, the death of that incarnation soon follows. And I'm like, wow, that's some heavy juju to deal with. That was, I think, modified in Revised, but it is interesting that we do get these consistent characters across editions, and I do kind of like that thread, which we get to talk more about 7 years from now when we get to the Akashic Revised Tradition book. But I really had no further thing. They indicate that the kukri is a hooked fighting knife. That's not the kukri I know, but maybe I'm thinking of something different. I really would have liked pictures for the weapons, but this was the 90s and images were expensive, and I can just Google that, John, now. That very much goes in the previous conversation we've had where, hey, if we're going to do a new tradition book, include hyperlinks.
Yeah, the kukri has a curved blade, but you're right, I would not describe it as being hooked.
The art was perfectly fine. I thought that the focus section was kind of phoned in. Like, some of them, I feel like if you're going to include some of these things that are going to be nonsensical to your average Westerner, i.e. me, at least give me an explanation. Like correspondence, large jars is listed as one of the focuses. I'm like, I'm going to need an explanation for that.
Yeah, I can think of some older Chinese legends where that connects to, but I'm not going to go into all that now. But yeah, you're right. It was a little clumsy, and as much criticism as I had against the Euthanatos tradition book, when it came to the appendix and the foci section, that was really gold. I noticed that for this book, there was no reading list, which I was like, wait, I love the reading lists, recommended reading at the back of Mage books, and this didn't even have one, so I'm not going to make this a long list. I got 4 titles here, and 3 that are appropriate and 1 offbeat, and so I am giving you a recommended reading list for Akashic Brotherhood First Tradition book. First up, you gotta include the Tao Te Ching. This particular copy that I have, they have the title as De Tao Jing. This is attributed to the historical, some might say legendary figure of Lao Tzu, who is credited as the founder of Taoism in China before 0 CE or AD, depending on how you rate the years. It is not known if he was a real person or not, but this translation is by Robert G. Hendricks, and it is offered to us by the Modern Library. This one was published in 1993. I really do like this edition because not only is it a fresh translation, but the author was working with archaeologists, and they had dug up a collection of ancient texts that was discovered in the 1970s. And much like the Dead Sea Scrolls did for biblical scholarship, this find informed a lot of translations of the Chinese classics. So these days when you go to a bookstore and you get a Tao Te Ching in English, a lot of times it's just a reprint of translation done many years before. But with this translation, the author brought in the new found texts and filled in some blanks in earlier texts in ancient Chinese, and really gave us a pretty strong book there. So I like this edition.
So, stupid question. What is in the book?
This is the foundational text for Taoism. This is where Taoism gets its start.
Is it parables? Is it an instruction manual? Is there another text you can kind of compare it to? I am simply not familiar with it. I have heard of it, obviously, but what is actually in it?
It's mostly I guess you could say like a philosophical
Essays?
Yeah, the author is mostly saying this is how it is, and this is what things are like. It's in China, it's infinitely quotable, as they say. A lot of 1 or 2 sentence lines you see in English are pulled out of this book. Some translations have the Tao that can be spoken of is not the true Tao, and the Tao is like water, and many other things like that come from this book. So it's not actually a very long book, but most translations have a good introduction and notes in it to help you understand the sort of poetic language that is very common for earlier Chinese works. For example, the Art of War is often really hyped as this super book on philosophy and good living and accomplishing inner peace and happiness and all this stuff. And when you look at a really good translation of the Art of War, you see it is actually a very practical, hands-on, nuts and bolts guide to how to arrange your forces on a battlefield so you win instead of lose. But the author was a member of the nobility, and so he wrote in this sort of poetic language that was expected of educated Chinese people hundreds of years ago. And so in translations it comes across as, oh, that is so philosophical, when actually he's talking about, check if it's going to rain today, because if it rains it gets muddy and it's just crap on your forces.
Oh, interesting. So almost like Meditations by Marcus Aurelius, it was originally written as a wildly practical book, and only later did this kind of edifice of philosophicality, I guess, and super deep reflection develop around it. It's not a direct thing, but whenever I think of ancient texts that are considered to hold super wisdom but are mostly practical advice, I usually go to a lot of the Stoic texts.
Yeah. One example is that I've heard some people say, "Oh, Akashic Brotherhood, you should go read the Book of 5 Rings, from Pan by Musashi." And I've read 2 translations of that, and again, it was a very, very practical guide to winning one-on-one duels to the death. It's like, stand so that the sunlight is in your opponent's face, but not in your face, because then he's a little bit distracted and you're not, and then you could really drive the sword into his guts. And it's like, okay, this is not talking about philosophy. This is talking about stabbing somebody. But okay, I just spent a few minutes talking about the Art of War and Book of 5 Rings. I don't really recommend those as directly connecting to the Akashic Brotherhood, but I do think they're great books and you ought to check them out. But moving on to number 2 on my list is Chuang Tzu, or I'm probably mispronouncing that, but it's also called The Inner Chapters. And this is, the authorship is unknown on this one. It was written quite a long time ago, although after Tao Te Ching. People believe it was written by a number of different authors, and it is hard to attribute it to the real authors because a lot of the pieces in here are attributed to famous known philosophers of the past to try and add weight to the book. And so there's a number of conversations here between Confucius and someone else that everybody is convinced, no, Confucius didn't really say that. Confucianists themselves say, no, we never thought that. But anyways, The Inner Chapters is the source of one of the quotes I shared at the beginning of this episode, and that is basically a hodgepodge, a collection of a lot of different short pieces that pretty much stand on their own. There's a number of old legends that are supposed to have philosophical weight. There's a lot of koan sounding, confusing things here that a storyteller could use as really solid material in an exchange. For example, if you have your players, whether they're Akashic mages or some totally different kind of mages, they come to find some elderly Akashic brother who speaks in riddles. It's like, oh, I need some riddles now. Well, hey, the Chuang Tzu is your source. You can get the riddle of the great bird who rises up from the sea and flies towards the west, and then it's done. And it's like, wait, what? Was there wisdom in there? And it's like, the Akashic brother smiles. It's like, darn it, I'm supposed to know that, but I don't. And so there's a lot of short cryptic pieces in here that give you food for thought. They're fun to read and really easy to slip into a game session. Okay, number 3 is The 3 Pillars of Zen by Roshi Philip Kapleau. This was originally put out in 1965. My copy comes from Anchor Books and was published, reprint from 1989. It's the 25th anniversary edition, which has some additional notes added by people in the introduction. And this is a really solid book. It clocks in at almost 400 pages, but there are some specific, illustrations and information on how to compose your body when you're meditating, and a few things in the appendix that you can easily skip without really missing much. One of the things I really enjoy from this book is it has the 10 ox herding pictures with commentary and verses. This is a metaphor that is commonly used in Zen Buddhism on both sides of the Sea of Japan, and it metaphorically speaks of someone seeking enlightenment, as compares that to someone trying to put a rope around an ox and catch it. And so there's 10 phases of trying to get that ox, and this equates to 10 phases of getting closer and closer to the Buddhist idea of enlightenment. And so there's commentary, there's traditional Chinese paintings to go along with it, and again, this is the kind of material that I would pull into a seeking or a game session I'm doing with my players to make Akashic mages look more Asian. That is one to look for. And my last one is the wild card. I'm going to throw in some manga here, just to be that guy. This manga title is called Orion. This comes from Japanese manga creator Masamune Shirow, and yes, I am aware that Masamune Shirow is a pen name, taking famous swords and other things from Japanese tradition and turning them into a pen name. I think his real name is Mr. Ota. He lives in Kobe. And this one was translated, it was put out by Dark Horse Comics. It was translated by Studio Proteus by Frederick Schott and Torrin Smith, who I've actually met at anime conventions. They're kind of fun to talk to when you meet them. This book was put out in 1994, the same year as the Akashic Brotherhood Tradition Book. Orion is not a book that maps neatly to the Akashic Brotherhood, but I mention it because it is very good reading for mage fans. I think it's very appropriate as an East Asian mage book. It is a sci-fi sort of fantasy book. It talks about an alternate world, not even Earth at all. But in this alternate world, they have this really strange practice. They call it in one place psychoscience, and it draws heavily on Buddhist tradition. And the whole time you're reading the book, you're trying to figure out, are they doing magic or are they doing some highly developed form of science? They talk about equations and numbers and measurements and devices, but they also have a heavy dollop of Buddhist mysticism added on top. And so it's one of those fun puzzles. By the end of the book, I still don't know, were they doing magic or were they doing science? The story of the book is a subtle commentary on Buddhism, so it makes it very clever. But there's even some material that you might draw in for your more wild East Asian technomancers. They talk about Dharma equations, taking the word Dharma and equation and just ramming it together, and they do some odd things with this. The book even has some appendices where the author goes into more detail about how yin-neurons and yang-neurons work, which are supposed to be subatomic particles at a lower level even than protons, electrons, and neutrons. And of course that's invented for this book, but and it's a reference to yin and yang from Taoist thought and Chinese tradition. And the appendices talk about that and how the energy, there's a diagram of how the energy works when the yin-neurons and yang-neurons are rotating in different directions. Really wild stuff. Also some more information about the world and the history of it and some fun maps.
And because I haven't talked in 8 minutes, I will merely note that all of this will be available in the show notes if you are not writing that down studiously while taking your morning commute or on the subway or whatever it is you, dear listener, do while listening to our podcast.
I have 3 adventure ideas to close out the episode. A great avatar has been reborn and discovered by the Akashics. This child, now 10 years old, is being gently trained at a secluded chantry in Thailand. Soon, the child will be taken to the Temple of Inner Peace's Horizon Realm to meet Akashic leaders and delegates from other traditions. The characters learn from a reliable source that the child is a fake, and the Fondi group has used potent techniques to fake the child's aura and plant some kind of trap inside the child. The characters must either find the secluded chantry or gain entry to the Horizon Realm in time to expose the danger. When they do, they will oppose their own brethren. Number 2, a cabal of Akashic mages has formed a traveling Chinese acrobat performance group. In cities they give performances, but also recruit for local martial arts schools and Buddhist temple events in that city. The group uses a talisman on stage that has an uncertain past. Clues indicate it may be very powerful indeed. Marauders have attacked the traveling group and will probably strike again. The players must travel and perform with the group until they can uncover the truth about the talisman and stop the marauder attacks. This might be a good chance to develop contacts, resources, and other backgrounds for your players. Number 3, Akashic leadership asks the players to investigate disappearances at Akashic Horizon Realms and Chantries. It seems small, peaceful gardens are appearing out of nowhere. Disciples who meditate or walk there sometimes disappear. The gardens often manifest as extensions of other gardens, so they can be hard to identify. The players learn these gardens are tied to the Eastern Umbral Court. Can the players learn the way to the Eastern Court? If so, can they successfully negotiate there? Why are the gardens appearing, and can the missing disciples be found? So hopefully there's a few ideas there that might inspire some ideas of your own, but that's about all the material I have on the Akashic Brotherhood.
Yeah!
So on that note, I think it's time to draw this episode to a close. Thanks everyone for listening, and remember, if you would like to talk to us, or if you have any feedback for us on anything that you'd like to talk about, you can send us an email, magethepodcast@gmail.com. Subscribe to us on Mage the Podcast at iTunes, Google Play, TuneIn, and Anchor, some other places as well. And when you give us a review on iTunes, that improves our visibility so that other people can find us that much easier when they're doing searches of their own. Also, you can follow us on Twitter at Mage the Podcast. And this episode was funded by executive producers Richard Bat Brewster and Ira Grace. If you'd like to become an executive producer and help support the podcast, click the link on today's show notes at magethepodcast.com.
If you, like me, super enjoy when Adam's dog is in the background barking, reminding us that we have lives outside of this podcast, also drop us a line. Terry out.
Yes, and this is Adam Simpson saying until next time, towards ascension.
My sense of overwhelming mediocreness regarding this book may bleed through at times.
No, I'll be doing that on the Hermetic, but don't mention don't mention it. Nobody will notice.